This week's episode was brought to you by Israel Valar and Brian Kirby. If you too would like to support The Whole Rabbit, or maybe just join our ragtag bunch of tarot magic students, head on over to www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where a mere $5 donation will result in Discord access, high-resolution artwork, and bonus shows chucked at you at high velocity through your internet jack. The stickers, on the other hand, come in what the ancients call snail mail and will be delivered at no extra cost to you. On this week's show, we discuss rabbits, their mythology, their fluffy fur, their drunken rituals, and tricky ways. We discover a similarity between all rabbit mythology and get ourselves wet in the abyssal waters of noon. So jump on in. The water's great. Kick back, relax your jollies. Thank you and enjoy the show. Seth's just there, like, programming the continuation of government protocols.
Got a lot of paperwork to do for your file.
Hey guys,
I'm not doing any of it.
Wait, what?
I said I gotta fill out a lot of paperwork for Luke's file because you're not doing any of it.
I shoot all the guys and bury the bodies. What do you want me to do?
I could help bury the bodies. I could help with the bodies, at least.
No, you can't do that to yourself, sweetheart. Oh.
Okay.
Well, it's also like a conflict of interest, so...
I understand.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys got a job.
We don't...
It's like red tape and shit.
We're not allowed to let clients, clients do that.
Yeah.
You know what I really like about the extra supercharged $400 executive order to the unemployment? You know what I like about that? Yeah, also that, gimme it. But that's
I don't have unemployment. I don't want that.
It's a magic number according to rabbits.
Well, Trump kind of knows some of that shit.
There's 400 drunken rabbits. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we don't.
This is the most distracted.
What?
Oh, Pyre, no. Everybody shut up. Luke's got to talk. Daddy Luke's talking.
I gotta do the intro.
Sorry. Bad timing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we don't just trick a bunch of crocodiles into making a land bridge. No. We throw a bonfire with a bunch of other animals because we don't have any real skills, so we throw ourselves into the flame and allow ourselves to be eaten by the wandering prince and give him our blessing to boink the princess his brothers are fighting for. I'm your host, Luke Madrid, and today we're joined by Mari Sama.
Hi.
Seth, the crocodile handler.
Hey.
And the Great Pyre, our resident alchemist.
How's it hanging?
It hangs. He's got some delay on that.
Yeah, but you could cut it out. Shut up. You're the editor. You can do it.
And today,
make it work.
The mission is for us to go hard on our little rabbit friends, because we've gotten about 67 episodes into The Whole Rabbit and haven't seriously talked about the mythology of rabbits in like a dedicated episode. So I thought, in the spirit of spontaneity, we would just do it this week, because we talk about rabbits a lot. Almost as much as, we probably talk about The Shining more than rabbits, but the two things actually tie into each other. And that's kind of where I started, just because Seth pointed out the Great Mother painting in The Shining, and that's sort of like where the spiral began for me in my research. Seth, you like rabbits, right? You're a rabbit guy?
Yeah, rabbits are pretty cool.
I guess.
I heard you liked rabbits, so...
Yeah, I used to raise rabbits for 4-H, and you get them when they're babies, and you raise them for like 6 months, and then you take them to the fair and you show them, and eventually you sell them off, and they kill them. People eat them. It's pretty sad. Yeah, there are a lot of like crying kids at the end.
Sounds like Charlotte's Web, but with bunnies.
It's kind of weird.
You'd have to prove that one bunny is special, and then like every year you have to prove it's special. Some stupid magic trick.
Yeah, and if it does well enough, it gets a ribbon, because you have to show it, and whichever one is the best well-behaved and weighs the most gets the prize.
Is there a secret trick for making your rabbit weigh the most?
Yeah, so I definitely don't condone this, and it's terrible that people did this. But back in the day, people would shove like lead up the I don't know how much I'm allowed to swear, but they'd shove it up the ass of the rabbit, and then they'd weigh their rabbits in that way. I mean, it's terrible.
That.
You're like, this tiny rabbit is so heavy and irritated.
Yeah.
You could just weigh him down with psychological baggage instead, but I guess that's the new way.
Yeah, just give the rabbit a day job and a family.
It's like, God. It's like they can't even weigh the rabbit because they're too heavy just looking at it. They're like, oh, God.
Yeah, just let him go. We're not even going to sell him.
Just let him go. And the rabbit just like walks out of the cage and just like looks up and waits for an eagle.
No, it's funny that you say that because there's mythology with a rabbit and an eagle.
I didn't run into that one yet. So I'm happy you're going to bring it up. So to put my money where my mouth is, I looked into Aztec and Mayan mythology first. And because I'm dumb, I don't really understand the difference between the two, except they had a geological separation, but a lot of their mythologies overlap. I know that
seems to be what happens in the Native Americas, because the tribes had a decentralized form of communication. So the tribes that were nearest to each other had similar myths, but they would change the name slightly to fit their dialect. So there's a lot of confusion among the Native American. Like, I looked into some of the North American stuff. You did a lot of the South American research.
Oh, cool.
But it seems to be that when tribes or civilizations are next to each other, that they have a lot of similar gods and goddesses, but they go by slightly different or modified names. And I think a good example of that would be the original Greek gods and goddesses. You have those, but in Roman mythology, you have the same basically pantheon of gods, but they have different names.
Right.
So but they were next to each other and they were trading together. So, it makes sense for them to ascribe it was a pagan religion anyway. So they just put different names on the deities. So when we're talking about the Americas, especially, there's a lot of like ambiguous names and deities that we're going to have to deal with. And there's just, they're across the board.
Okay, because I learned about the Aztecs when I was in 10th grade. That was probably 20 years ago or so. Maybe that's probably exaggerating. Probably closer to like 17 years. But I also learned about these cultures like separated in time. And when I was researching this, my sources would make reference to both the Mayan and the Aztec myths almost interchangeably. And because some of these myths come from the Aztec and the Mayan calendars, respectively, yeah, you're right. Those myths do play into each other in a really interesting way. But even more interesting is that the motifs of the rabbit seem to extend across continents, across cultures, because there's stuff in the Japanese and the Chinese and the Mayan and the American that's all the same. And that's what's really cool about it. So just to get started, most of the information I have about the Aztec is gleaned from the Codex Barbonicus, a text that was created shortly following or maybe just prior to the invasion of the Spanish. So to begin, we have to start with Xochitl. She was the goddess of flowers, which included agave, or what they called magui. A root or sap is then fermented to become pulque, and it's a prototypical form of tequila. The tapestry of mythologies related to this plant seem to encode a wisdom about maturity, time, indulgence, bad decisions, and their dubious relationship to fun. For starters, if you were a youngster and you were caught drinking pulque, one of the punishments was being strangled to death.
Whoa.
It was generally understood that youngsters were not possessed of the self-control to indulge in this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really treat it much differently today either, though.
No.
I mean, we don't strangle people, but we'll fucking throw them in jail.
It's been a long time since I had this conversation, but when I was a kid, I met someone from El Salvador, and he said that the punishment for driving drunk could be death. I don't know if that's true anymore, but that does echo the sentiment of treating drunkenness with harshness that we, traditionally don't over here. As such, things do not end up well for Xochitl, who after offering some of the magui to the king of Tula, becomes unable to control himself and rapes the young Xochitl, who consequently falls to become the youthful goddess of prostitution. This echoes the fall of woman from her position of oracular priestess, one who spoke the word of God and the living embodiment of the goddess, one who held within her the secrets of fertility, the earth, and its sacred pleasures, to the position of prostitute at the hands of a drunken, lustful, mortal king or patriarch. So I thought that was important because of this being forced upon by the king who's drunk, she essentially loses her position as the goddess of flowers, but she becomes, well, at least to me, a sort of daughter of fortitude, Babylon, Sophia type figure who's cast down.
Exactly.
Yeah, because of her innocence. Like,
well, yeah, because I feel like these figures are often martyrs. Like they have to sacrifice something of their own flesh to be exalted to that position. There's all the myths kind of echo this as well. There's another one about
Sounds exactly like Eve in the Garden of Eden, eating the fruit, which was the agave, and then her punishment was the pain of childbirth.
Well, it's weird too because a woman also or a woman's virginity is referred to as a flower. You're before you're taken, you're a bloom, like a blossom. So it's interesting too because an apple is a fruit of the blossom.
Mm-hmm.
But the agave isn't a flower, though.
No, but we'll get into that. I do want to mention, though, that I'm sure the higher initiates notice that the flower is ever blooming. It's not something that's just used up, much like how the patriots would think of it.
Or the fountain of youth. That's where that comes from, is eternal youth, ever blooming. And to defile it, is to kind of essentially cut the flower, you know what I mean? Like, and once the flower dies and it's fertilized, it produces fruit, the apple.
Well, the more disturbing thing is Xochitl becomes the goddess of youthful prostitution also. So there's a key there where if you are violated, it sort of sticks with you, is part of the lesson, which is probably why the punishment can be death for getting drunk on polka, because it carries with it such a strong risk of hurting the innocent.
And I see how you're relating her to Babylon.
I'm really into the Babylon thing, I guess you could say. The one who's destined to take her place as the goddess of Magui was the young and beautiful Mehuel, who sat on the edge of a cloud, hidden away in the far corner of heaven, prisoner of her wicked grandmother, the jealous star demon Tzitzimidal. There on the edge of her cloud, in the far corner of heaven, Mehuel sang the tune of sadness, longing, and hope, whose whispers, night after night, would be heard by the great Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of the intellect, self-reflection, and the morning star, but in his aspect of Ehecatl, the wind. Having set his wind to the four corners of the heavens to find her, well, once he did, he couldn't help but fall madly, deeply, truly in love with her, wrapped himself around her in the form of the winds, around her body, night after night, and their passion grew until they became one. Infuriated but helpless, the wicked Tzitzimil pursued her with her army of demons, but Ehecatl lowered Mehuel to earth, where their union would become manifest as the splendorous Magui plant, whose green spires pointed heavenward from both their origin and from which their pursuers would come. When Tzitzimil finds the plant, she chops it and boils it out of rage, feeding her demon armies with the tequila. In other renditions of the tale, Mehuel, as the Magui plant, marries Petactl, the lord of fertility and healing, who, along with Mehuel, gives birth to the dun-dun-dun Senson Totochin, the 400 rabbits who are perpetually drunk on the teats of Magui, who's both a plant and their mother, and constantly issues polka, which loosely translates to honey water. These divine rabbits meet together frequently to party and they each have unique personages. They each have names and stuff that are very hard to pronounce, much like the other names that I'm sure I messed up pronouncing. But this is how you earn your stripes. You have to stumble over these Aztec and Mayan names. They are so hard.
There's something cool that I do want to add about Quetzalcoatl before we move on.
Mm-hmm.
Is that there's another myth about him in the moon rabbit.
Really?
Mm-hmm. There was a story about him, and I don't know if it was a spirit or something. Quetzalcoatl was in his earthly form and wandering the mountains, and he came to a point where he was starving and thirsty and pretty much dying while he was wandering around in his mortal form. A female rabbit came to him and offered her body like as a sacrifice to feed him. And apparently he lifted her to the moon, into the heavens, to the moon and placed her image on the moon so that everyone could recognize her and her sacrifice for all times.
That's
So
more or less the Japanese one too.
Yeah, but it's really strange because you mentioned this in the beginning, is that this shows up all around the world, but some of them aren't really related. And this kind of legend in the Aztec folklore actually does relate a lot to the Japanese one, but they don't really have a historical link to each other. I thought that was kind of interesting that there is a sacrifice of a rabbit to this god. And then later he births the 400 rabbits.
All I gotta say is that if I created my own Knights of Ren, they'd be called the Senson Totochin, because that is the most metal thing I've ever heard in my whole existence. There's 400 drunk rabbits.
That's the army corps of the whole rabbit.
It's just
that's like us when we were watching the Holy Mountain.
woo. Yeah, we got sloshed, man. Life is stressful. It's like it checks you though. Life checks you. You're like, man, I'm gonna drink more, but I'm too depressed to go buy more. And then you're done being an alcoholic. I don't know. That's a bit optimistic. So speaking of which, there are actually 400 of these rabbits, but I guess 400 is one of those things where to the Buddhists, like 1,000 means like infinite. So there's just a lot of these rabbits. Okay. But some of them have unique personages, and I'm going to try and pronounce them because they're very hard. Tepotzicatl, 2 rabbit. And what's funny is these rabbits, including 2 rabbit, are aspects of drunkenness. At least that's what the research I found suggested, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. 2 rabbit, as he's named, was considered the king of the drunken rabbits and the god of polka, where his mother is also connected to nourishment. Tochli is all about fertility and drunkenness. That's his other name. Which makes one suspect that, like today, many babies are conceived in the libido of boinking on alcohol, basically. It's this idea that there are creations in the world that are born of drunkenness. And then the next one is Makul Tochitli, where Tochitli still knew what moderation in alcohol was. His brother 5 Rabbit took things a little further. Officially, he is the god of alcoholic beverages, but he also stood for excess and the consequences of excess. Basically, he's the rabbit god of getting smashed and having hangovers.
I was worshiping him a few weeks ago.
So if you worship him, do you not get hangovers?
Yeah, she had.
You worship him to take it away.
Don't you remember?
Please.
Tetzkatzalcoatl, the straw mirror, another divine rabbit. He's the god of drunkards. And according to this myth, big one himself too. He's referred to as the straw mirror because in this drunken state, you can see as much of, man, I don't understand this one at all.
You can see as much when looking in a mirror made of straw. So, in other words, your vision is clouded in the fact that you no longer can reflect on reality.
Oh.
You can't see anything anymore. You're only stuck inside of yourself. That's like when you pass out, you know, when you're blackout drunk, like I want, you know, like when you forget what's happening, or you go to sleep, or you just keep doing it every day.
That's hilarious.
Then you can't see the future. You just see, when am I going to go to the store? How am I going to get money? These are the bums on the street that's all they do.
That's like in Dr. Sleep when he wakes up outside the train station and he tries to take a swig of the alcohol, but it's gone. And so he's like, dang it, now I have to not be the straw mirror rabbit anymore. Ah, okay.
He's blinded. He has his blinders on, and all he can think about is the mechanic, like the desire. You can't see clearly. You can't see other people. You can't see yourself. You can't see that the mirror is clouded.
Got beer goggles.
That's it. That's kind of a good one, but
actually,
I feel like that was the previous one.
Yeah, the first one and maybe this one. See, it's hard to tell them apart when you're drunk, right?
Well, there's 400 of them, so they all got to kind of be alike, you know?
They start one together. So Kolhatznkatl, he's called the winging one, and it's probably just because he's a little buzzed. He's tipsy. He's having a good time. I would imagine that's what he's about.
A bubbly drunk.
Yeah. Man, this one is so long. This is like the hardest level of Guitar Hero. Can you try pronouncing that? That's insane.
What's Kohatsunkatl.
Nope.
Kohatsunkatl.
No, this one's
Oh,
Tekechumakuni. Tekechumenakuni.
shut up. Tekech. Cow.
I think it's
Kawiani. To catch Makwani. To catch Makwani. To catch Makwani.
So apparently this is
County.
this is the drunken god of people who would accidentally hang themselves when they were drunk. I don't know of anyone who's actually hung themselves when they're drunk, but it could happen. Like people who are.
Is that the noise you make? Is that the noise you make when you hang yourself?
But they're also respected as the god of early civilization. Like Toltecatl is the god in the 400 rabbits of earlier civilization. And then there's a god of dance. Tequila, the literal translation is squirrel. So he's the god of dance. Imagine a dancing squirrel.
That's awesome. Like a raving squirrel.
That's like when you get drunk and you just hit the dance floor. You just can't contain yourself. You just like...
I'm going to climb the walls, man.
You just like... You just got to go.
So you only have 7 out of 400. So is this like tribes or, you know?
No, those are just some of the rabbits. And the rabbits have different positions too. Like in some of the myths of Meahuel, they're already there in the heavens, like dancing about, having fun. And then in other myths, they come about from the flesh that is created from her union with Quetzalcoatl and the aspect of air, Ehakatl.
Oh, I see.
It's hard to say what. And a lot of my sources for all of these stories would have different endings and beginnings and middles. And it was sort of difficult to figure out what the overall story was.
And a lot of reasons that or a lot of the times the reason that is in native cultures. I mean, you might have pictograms or like the Egyptians had hieroglyphs, but a lot of the American natives had oral histories. So they didn't necessarily write down things in their language. And if they could write it, it would be on paper. They wouldn't. Only the Mayans and the Aztecs really carved into stone, you know, often enough to where we could read what they were saying. But a lot of it's pictograms. It's really hard to nail down the literary source of any of these myths. And that's why each tribe has their own flavor, so to speak.
Did you have some North American tribes you wanted to talk about and their myths?
One note I have here. So we're moving up to North America now.
Yeah, so tell us about the Cree.
Yeah, one of the tribes that I noted with the rabbit myth that was interesting is the Cree Native American tribe. And they were located around Lake Superior, on the west side of Lake Superior. And today they mostly live in Montana. The Chippewa tribe was also pretty close to them, so they may have similar myths. They had a cool story about a young rabbit who wanted to go to the moon, and the only bird that he could convince to take him there was a crane. And while the crane was flying him to the moon, it actually stretched the crane's legs out. And from the ride, the rabbit was ragged and tired. And when he got to the moon, he placed his paw on the crane's head and left a red mark. So the lore says that you can see rabbits riding the moon today, which is, it kind of leads us into the mythology behind the rabbit and how it relates to the moon, because there's an image of the rabbit in the moon, which kind of explains why so many different cultures associate the moon with rabbits. So I thought that story was kind of interesting. And it also explains why a crane has long legs and a red marking. It's just kind of an interesting aside.
Well, there's another myth in the Japanese where his fur gets all ragged and messed up as well.
And then rabbit seems to be a companion in most myths. So in this myth, he's a companion to the crane. In the Japanese myth, he's usually a companion to a goddess or something like that.
Yeah, you know, he's not really a central character that much. I guess he is more in American mythology with Bugs Bunny, maybe Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, we'll talk about all that
We'll get there. That'll be near the end. So
because I know all about that, but
I know a little bit
less. I
less.
was reading some of the Native American stuff is really interesting because the Cree story that I just told you that's North America near the Great Lakes. So it's bordering Canada. We're in the northern region. So rabbit there is more of an innovator. And of course they have, fertility and moon relations in every culture, but if you go further down in the Cherokee tribes and the Creek tribes, the Alabama, and there's so many more. But in the southeastern United States, basically, the rabbit was a trickster character. So he would try to convince people to do something and get something out of it. So, and I know that a lot of people are familiar with coyote as being the trickster in Native American lore, but in the Southeast, rabbit also was a totem of being a trickster.
Yeah, you have here written in the notes the Cherokee, the Cree, Alabama.
Creek.
Oh, Creek.
Cree are northern out up by the Great Lakes. So they're separate. So their rabbit was an adventurer, like a pioneer, kind of. In the Southeast, he was a trickster, like how Satan is portrayed, or the Lightbringer, Thoth.
Wow, he's a little bit like that in Donnie Darko, isn't he?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good movie. But people are more familiar with coyote being the trickster, or crow. Some of the tribes use crow. Rabbit in the Southeast, rabbit was the trickster, and that's where you get stories like I mean, you mentioned Bugs Bunny. He's a modern iteration of this lore, but Briar Rabbit is a southern old slave story that they would tell.
Oh, wow. When I ran across it in the research, my mind was like, I've never heard of that. But then when you said it out loud, yes, I do.
Brer, you say it Brer. It's not Briar Rabbit, it's Brer.
Like brother.
But kind of.
Briar Rabbit.
More like, but he's Briar Rabbit. He's a trickster. He wants to be your brother, but he's a briar. He has thorns. That's an iteration of the Native American. The Native American culture kind of like intermingled with the Black American culture, which is really interesting because I did read a note that in Central Africa, in the tribal lores and stuff, rabbits are tricksters in Central Africa. So it makes sense, like the Native Americans in that area that were exposed to the Black slaves, they kind of integrated this into like their mythology, and it became like in the Southeast, the rabbit is the trickster,
Okay.
not the coyote.
We're going to go 0 to 100 right now. I think that part of the reason that all the family members in The Shining are rabbits have to do with the fact that a bunch of rabbits are called a colony. And I think that the Native Americans, like, they saw a connection between the white man, the colony, and how like, it's like, oh, you can have this land over here. Like 5 minutes there, they're like, did we say that really? You know what I mean? Like, you can't really trust anything. Like you can't trust what the colonists are going to say. They're liars. They're tricksters, and they multiply like crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting note, because the rabbit comes to you in an appealing way and wants, and that's another thing, is that rabbits also traditionally are empathetic. Like people empathize with them because they're small, they're prey animals. A lot of people that feel, afraid will empathize with them, or children are very apt to do that. So it's a good, I guess, self-insert kind of character.
Like if you were going to, if you want to appear kind and gentle and harmless, appear as a rabbit.
Right. It's similar to a sheep, but the rabbit is a little bit more active and alert. It can cause trouble. Right. It's a more alert.
The sheep almost doesn't even seem like it would know what's going on, even if it does.
So that's something else, is that they're so sensitive. He's prone to inappropriate behavior, though, and particularly gluttony, carelessness, and overinflated ego. So in a way, it was used as a warning. So that's what the trickster is supposed to show you, like how you can manipulate people and why you shouldn't, or why you shouldn't trust somebody that gives you a really good deal. And then the rabbit is also associated with the entity that stole fire and brought it to the humans. So that has to do with Prometheus, which I thought was kind of interesting. He's almost a light bringer. Tricksters can be antagonistic to human beings, but at the same time, they can also bring knowledge by tricking them.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And we're going to see a lot of repeating motifs when we move across the sea to China. In fact, it's almost frustrating because it seems like we've talked about all these things so far, but
it's very similar.
There's a lot of similarities.
Not related. Right,
not related. It's just they happen to appear in separate areas, but they're built into like central parts of the mythology. So in China, and this is very similar to the Indian tale, there's an old man, and in this case, it's a jade emperor, and the rabbit sacrifices his body so that the emperor can eat. He throws himself into the flame, but he's not hurt. In fact, he's sent to the moon where he then pounds out the elixir of immortality.
In a mortar and pestle, a Chinese medicine.
And he does so for Chang'e, who's famous for stealing the elixir of immortality from either her husband, the archer Hao Yi, or the Jade Emperor himself. In some versions, she's cast down from the palace for breaking a porcelain pot. In the Gui Kang, she steals the immortality herb from the Western Queen Mother, escaping to the moon, and becomes its essence. Either way, the rabbit, through sacrifice, ends up going to hang out with Chang'e, who is awesome, and he helps her pound out the elixir of immortality in his mortar and pestle. So this manifestation of the rabbit bearing Chang'e's immortality elixir is called Yutu or Yiutu, which means moon rabbit and jade rabbit, respectively. Both Chang'e and Yutu are central figures in Chinese mythology and are celebrated at the Mid-Autumn Moon Festival, which apparently is a big deal. And according to my sources, it's like the second biggest holiday in the whole Chinese bunch of holidays.
Right. The companion to the goddess is constantly making, also that he makes medicine. He doesn't just pound the elixir of life. There's also a myth in Chinese folklore that he makes medicine for the people, kind of giving the gods knowledge of plants and natural healing medicines to the people. He's like a conduit for godly knowledge.
But once again, a helper or a companion.
Correct. He's a companion animal, but it's a way to mediate between the gods and the people.
And then if we move over to Japan, we have the legend of the hair of Inaba. And this goes back to the Kojiki, which is said to have been drawn up between like 711 and 712 AD. And from what I can gather, it's the Shinto equivalent of Hesiod's theogony. And it's an attempt to take all the local legends and records and to dedicate them into one unified text. So this text contains Shinto myths, gods, kami, spirits, and all that stuff. According to the Kojiki, Okunimushi was the 81st and youngest prince in a family of cruel, quarreling brothers. Every single one, including Okinamushi, had desired to wed the fairest princess of the land who dwelled in the Inaba region. The 80 other brothers treated Okuninushi with contempt, for he was mild of character and refused to participate in the contentious quarreling between all of his brothers. As a sign of their collective cruelty towards Okuninushi, they forced upon him the burden of carrying their luggage. While the 80 brothers traveled the land unencumbered, they happened upon a rabbit, plucked of his fur, exasperated and lying in the road helpless. Pleading for help, the cruel brothers decided to trick the rabbit by giving him bad recipes from 4chan. They told him, wash yourself in the salty seawater and then allow yourself to dry in the wind in the midday sun. Of course, the salty water hurt the rabbit's wounds and only found his skin cracking and bleeding after being dried in the wind and sun. The rabbit lay again in the road, even more exasperated than before. When Okuninushi happened upon the rabbit, he asked the little fellow what had happened. The hair of Inaba was happy to explain that he had lost his hair while crossing a land bridge made of crocodiles. He had tricked the crocodiles into lining up to form a land bridge by exciting them to prove whose clan was bigger, the gator or the rabbits, and he offered to count them one by one as he skipped across their backs. Unfortunately, the rabbit could not contain his desire to boast, and before reaching the shore, began to brag that he had tricked the crocodiles, and before getting clear, the last one snatched off his hair. Worse yet, when the 80 brothers happened upon him, it only made his fate worse. The kind Okuninushi took pity on the rabbit and told him accurate advice that washing himself in fresh waters and rolling in the soft pollen of cattails would soothe his skin and allow his fur to regrow eventually. At this point, the hair of Inaba reveals himself to be a powerful spirit and bless Okuninushi with being chosen by the princess of Inaba. Brothers, basically, the worthless D-bags would get rejected and they don't really deserve her anyway. So the blessing works. The princess rejects the 80 brothers and accepts Okuninushi as her husband. So there's more to the story. They try and like kill him afterwards, and it just goes like on and on and on and on. But like for our story, that's where like the rabbit figure ends. He basically helps Okuninushi get the hot princess that everyone wants. But I also noticed in the Japanese zodiac, they replaced the rabbit with the cat. Why do you think that is?
I feel like that the Japanese had more cats because they were farmers. And they stored a lot of grain, and they would use a lot of cats to guard the farm. So they have a lot of cats there. They imported cats for for that position because it's not a big continent. You can't have a dog on your farm. So they use those as the mousers. And there's actually a island off of Japan called Cat Island where there's like a ton of wild cats.
What?
But they're revered in Japan pretty much because they help the farmers grow food. If you're on an island, dude, you don't have a lot of resources, you know? That's why they don't produce a lot of terrestrial meat like pork, chicken, and beef. They don't really have space.
Right.
So they're mainly fishermen and they grow grains like rice. So when they're storing the grain, the cat would protect the food storage from mice and vermin that would ruin it. So they revere cats in a way that I don't think inland China people do because they at least could have like grazing land. They could have cattle. They could have dogs and stuff like that. But the Chinese people couldn't, or the Japanese people couldn't have, you know, extensive farmlands because they were on an island. So they probably replaced the rabbit with the cat because, you know, maybe they related more to that because I don't think rabbits are actually, I mean, maybe there's rabbits in Japan, but maybe they're invasive. I have no idea.
I don't know either.
Yeah, but they're not, they, in Japanese folklore, really, similar to the Chinese mythology with Chang'e.
Chang'e?
There's
I
also
hope I'm saying that right.
Well, there's a Japanese company that uses a rabbit they use mochi, and so do the Koreans. But the rabbit is supposed to make mochi, which is food out of rice. It's rice cake.
I did run into that while studying the mythologies. That was a motif.
But, you know, if you think about food as the stuff of life, you need to eat to live. There's a Japanese company, a cosmetic company that uses the rabbit and the mortar and the pestle that they see in the moon to represent beauty and longevity and immortality, like the Chinese legend. I don't know why they had replaced rabbits with cats because, I mean, here, I have a note here. The most common explanation is that the Vietnamese word for rabbit, Mao, sounds like the Chinese word for cat, which is Mao.
No way.
So
that's awesome.
So when you say rabbit in Chinese, it's Mao, but in Japanese, also that's the sound the cat makes. Like that's the kanji that they use for the cat sound.
I hear in Germany, the cow says shazoo. That's way more accurate than moo.
I really like that stuff too, is figuring out like onomatopoeias from different, because a lot of times cultures will take an onomatopoeia from another one and then make a word out of it. You get a lot of like overlap that way.
All I know is the cow says shazoo. So moving on to India. In the Buddhist, let's get some food, man. So in the Buddhist Jataka tales, tale 316 relates that a monkey, an otter, a jackal, and a rabbit resolved to practice charity on the day of the full moon. Uposatha, this is called, believing a demonstration of great virtue would earn a great reward. When an old man begged for food from them, the monkey gathered fruits. The otter collected fish. The jackal found lizards and a pot of milk curd. I don't know where he got that. The rabbit pretty much only knew how to gather grass. So, feeling bad about the whole endeavor, threw himself into the fire, and this was meat for the man to eat.
That sounds like Cain and Abel, dude.
But the rabbit was not burnt. The old man revealed that he was Sakra, and touched by the rabbit's virtue, drew the likeness of the rabbit on the moon for all to see. It was said that the lunar image is still draped in smoke that rose when the rabbit cast himself into the fire. The rabbit is believed to be a bodhisattva. So bodhisattva is like a Buddha that vows to come back until every blade of grass is enlightened. It's like they just
a teacher, yeah.
They have something to prove.
He's a tireless teacher.
He's a try-hard Buddha.
Right. And you know what's really cool is I'm noticing as we go through all these is that the rabbit seems to be elevated to the moon to impress the image upon it for all ages. It's almost like they're giving it an homage. Because in a lot of these traditions, you're seeing the rabbit being sacrificed for a god to sustain or for people to eat. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times people would just eat rabbit because that's the only thing that was around to eat. But
there's no nutrition in it.
But, you know, a lot of times in the Bible and in Judaism and Christianity, you talk about goats being sacrifices, but rabbits kind of are the poor man's sacrifice. Rabbits are a very potent symbol of sacrifice, in fact.
Well, I found that my replacing the rabbit's head for the goat's head is actually a really unoriginal Egyptian idea of the exact same archetype and goddess, so I did nothing new.
It's almost like the goat is the pastoral version of a rabbit. They're the tamed ones that can stay in a field and they produce more meat, basically. But
Weird.
rabbits are the wild version of something of fodder that you would use as a sacrifice. Because you have to sacrifice something to eat. You wouldn't sacrifice your family, unless it was extreme circumstance. But with the rabbit,
Just their
provides a
foreskin.
nice, yeah, exactly. But the rabbit provides a nice small sacrifice that you can still do, even if you don't own goats or you don't have a herd. You could go shoot a rabbit
And still making the
with a bow and
kids
arrow or
sad.
whatever. I mean, I'm just thinking of ancient times and why they worship rabbits like this. And the reason is like they do proliferate a lot, which is why they're related to fertility. But it's interesting because they're a ready sacrifice. There's so many of them.
Moving on over to Egypt.
Let's see what
This
they
is
think.
This is where it gets. I really fell into the rabbit hole here. So in ancient Egypt, it was Unut or Wanet, who, despite her origins as a serpent goddess, was depicted as a woman with a rabbit's head. Dun dun dun. Babylon.
Oh, here's the first iteration of the sexy rabbit meme.
Yeah, it's not anything that I created, apparently. Apparently, it's a pretty old archetype, and it relates to. Well, let's get to that. The title she was given was the Swift One and was worshipped alongside Thoth Dahuti in the capital of Heliopolis. Interestingly, she is said to have been a consort to Osiris or Ra in the form of Wininu. After doing some digging, I was able to make some sense of this. As the mother/consort of Osiris Ra and a primordial serpent goddess, I feel it might be safe to say she's the rabbit form of Sekhet or Hathor. Osiris.
Yeah, because that's Hathor is like the goddess of fertility.
And that's a woman and a lion, and it represents the serpent force.
Yeah, the primordial sexual force of females.
The power of the Kuti,
Yeah.
which is the serpent that rises to the forehead and is the power of the pharaoh's power, nobility, magical strength, potency, all the rest of it.
Yes.
And so this goddess was a form of that, and in some forms she had a rabbit head. So, boom, there it is. Nothing new under the sun. Osiris takes the form of a rabbit because of all the reasons that Mari just said, because it's a ready sacrifice, and Osiris dies and is sacrificed and then is reborn. This was an apt symbol to use for Osiris. Here's the deal, though. So when he dies and is reborn, he's said to die and be reborn from Noon, which is the primordial underworld. And it's kind of a place where the sun goes at night. It's a place where Osiris and Ra go to rest while they die and are waiting to be reborn.
I feel like it's like limbo. Like people don't really know what's going on there, but they know like it'll end.
But it's kind of peaceful.
Yeah, because you know that it'll come to an end. It's kind of like taking a time out.
Yeah, it's like everything has ended, and now it's time to, it's totally like time to chill. It's before everything begins, too. It's just outside of, it's the abyss. So.
Right, exactly. The unknown.
So one title of Osiris, and I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but I think it might even be in the Ritual of the Bornless one. I've heard it before, is Unefer, which is a rabbit. And that's the form that's sacrificed to the Nile, specifically.
So it's weird, too, because rabbit represents life. So if you throw life into the abyss, will it create more life?
Well, we're getting to that. So
will it seed more?
Here's the thing is the hair itself in the hieroglyph is associated with that water, with that abyss. So you're definitely onto something. The hieroglyph
Unu
depicts a hair placed over zigzaggy lines which symbolize water and ideographically represent the verb to be or to exist.
Ah.
So actually, the hair was a fairly central part of ancient Egyptian conception of life in general.
Very interesting. So water represents emotions, correct? So if you're feeling stuff and you have no boundaries, how do you know who's who and who's you? It's interesting that the hieroglyph depicts the rabbit above the water. Because if you put a rabbit in water, I mean, you have this in the notes. It's like if you turn them upside down, they have this reaction, like they'll stop breathing. They don't go in water.
Well, they swim. Rabbits are good swimmers too.
They are. They want to get out. They want to get into the air. But it's interesting that these kind of put them together, because what it depicts is your urge to get your head above water, is your urge to survive. Rabbits are a very core symbol of the urge for survival, because they are a prey animal for everybody, you know?
To exist. And a prey animal to add to birds that were sacred to them, I'm sure.
And they're sacrifices for us. So they're a typical sacrifice. So it's interesting that the Egyptians relate them to water, because it's almost like they're struggling to breathe. That's their whole life. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
So and it also represents a human struggling to get out of their emotional turmoil to make a good decision, because you're trying to keep your head above water. So that's interesting.
To be or to exist. That's crazy that the verb would be that, you know, that's like they're saying that about existence itself. That it's just, it's struggling to stay above the abyss.
Right. It's trying to get out of it and like be safe as an individual person. So it represents yourself as an ego in a way, because it separates itself from the abyss, the water. It wants to kick and swim and survive and procreate.
That must be why Kubrick used it as a symbol in The Shining. So there's further notes on this about the Egyptian rabbit. Wennet is further described in the portion spell 17 of the Book of the Dead, which reads, "Who is he? Swallower of the Myriads is his name, and he dwells in the lake of Wennet. To dwell in the lake of Wennet means to live renewed, revitalized, to be reborn, to live forever and ever." And this was associated with the god Atum-Ra. Spell 17 goes on to identify the dweller in the lake of Wennet as Atum-Ra, the creator of all, whose father is said to be Nun, because he rose out of the watery abyss. In spell 149, it describes the mound of Wennet, and this is where the spirit travels to be reborn and rejuvenated in the other world, or as they call it, the Duat. As for the mound of Wennet, which is in front of Rosatau, the breath is fire, and the gods cannot get near it. The spirit cannot associate with it. There are 4 cobras on it whose names are Destruction. O mound of Wennet, I am the greatest of spirits who are in you. I am among the imperishable stars who are in you, and I will not perish, nor will my name perish. O savior of a god, say the gods who are in the mound of Wennet, if you love me more than your gods, I will be with you forever. So it's a mound of like sacred creative energy in the Duat. And that's where you go to be rejuvenated in the other world before you are brought into the outer world, or your life, the overworld, whatever you call it. I don't know, the land.
I don't know. I feel like the more we go into all the different cultural symbols of this, the more it seems like this is a sacrifice of the victim. People who have been at the hands of evil, and they give themselves, you know what I mean? Like, it seems like they give themselves to be eaten as a sacrifice. And this is kind of like a description of like why that's important. It's a creative energy, because even if you eat the rabbit as a sacrifice, even if you destroy it, there will still be more spring up. And that's why it's also associated with regeneration, not only just sacrificing for ritual or spiritual gain, or even to eat as a physical reinforcement, but at the same time, all these gods are exalting the rabbit to the moon and trying to give honor to it in a way that it kind of says that they need to keep regenerating in order for life to go on, because they are a prey animal. Like, they provide life to other animals as well as themselves.
Well, the moon's associated with water, and water seeks this level, and it always goes to the lowest possible place it can rest. So
there's balance. There's a balance to it.
And so the rabbit keeps the balance by staying on the bottom of the totem pole in some way.
It's a willing victim.
Which is bizarre, because we have this association with the rabbit at Easter, and then it's like, oh, the rabbit is not Jesus. It's like, well, maybe the symbols go together in some weird way.
I mean, he kind of is, isn't he?
sacrificial lamb. That's sort of a big deal to his whole image, right? And is what he's doing.
He's a sacrifice for innocence. Lamb is also innocence because it's a young animal.
And is-
White means virginal, inexperienced, young. So yeah, you have a lot of associations with the young, the innocent, the people that they don't know any better. You need to protect them because they don't know any better. That's what a rabbit is. You
Protect
have to
them, they know
protect
not what
them.
they do.
Right. And they're constantly living in fear because they don't know how to defend themselves. That's why the white rabbit is such a potent image, because it's white means virginal, it means inexperienced, a baby, basically a clean slate. So when you invoke the image of a white rabbit, it means somebody that's an innocent, somebody who has no idea what's going on. So it makes sense that they're prey. They're constantly prey.
Speaking of prey, how you doing, Set? I mean, speaking of predators. I mean, speaking of, I can't talk straight. You used to raise rabbits, so did you ever throw rabbits in water? I'm just curious.
No, we never really threw rabbits in water.
They hate it.
Yeah. The most you really, I mean, you don't even really let them run around because they'll get loose unless you've got.
They eat cords.
Yeah, I mean they'll make a big mess. So normally you keep them in your hutch or your cage or your pen or whatever, and then if they're show rabbits, you'll take them out and try to get them used to you and get them used to humans. But
socialized.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned some strange things about rabbits, like if you turn them upside down, they pass out or something.
Oh, it was if you cover their eyes and their ears, they don't have like object permanence.
What does that mean?
So object
like birds do that too. When you put the hood over their cage, they can't see anything, so they can't react to it.
Yeah, so object permanence is something that like children develop when they're like 3 to 5, and it's the idea that if something is like gone from your field of vision, that like that hidden. It still exists. Yeah, so it's even if you can't see something, that it's still there.
Peekaboo. Peekaboo is like the game for that. Is like you play peekaboo with little kids and they're so thrilled with it. That is a way to teach them that you're still there, but you just put your hands in front of your face.
I don't know. They're pretty young when they can do like the 2 walk in, 1 walk out, where the other one go trick. Like it's, yeah.
Right, but they're still learning at that stage.
Yeah. True.
And then rabbits don't have that, is what Seth is trying to say.
Yeah. Real, so if you cover their eyes and ears, nothing else exists to them. It's like they're sleeping.
Right.
So anything that was scaring them is no longer there.
And they have this way. They have an instinctual reaction where they freeze. They freeze up when they're faced with danger.
It's that fight or flight, but mainly it's like for them it's freezing or fleeing. Because some animals, if you freeze, they can't see you.
Rabbits seem to freak out a lot more, like because deer have this too, but deer freeze. But rabbits kind of like flip the fuck out. I've seen like my roommate had a rabbit, and when I held him, he would freak out because he wasn't like sure about being next to a female. But like his legs would just go crazy. They just want to run.
Yeah,
it's embedded in them.
That's why you don't let them down, because they'll
take off,
run away. Yeah.
Yeah, he was in the house, so that was good. But yeah, you got to have like a run or a hutch outside when you interact with them, because they can take off. They're totally in tune with their emotional body. So when their body senses fear, they just fucking react.
Mm-hmm.
Like they just have a reaction. They can't control it really. So they're constantly under control of fear, which is really interesting, them being the sacrificial animal of choice, because they just kind of lay into it. They'll just let you kill them.
But they also have sex for pleasure. Not all animals do that.
Dolphins do it. Monkeys do it. Some primates, some apes.
What about dogs?
No, I wouldn't say so. Maybe a little bit.
You don't think so? What about the dog that's always humping everybody's leg?
Right, but I've had a rabbit that does that too. I guess that's, yeah, okay.
Dogs do it for fun too.
Because the rabbit that hated my boobs also wanted to hump my legs, so
I just don't think rabbits care about human boobs the way we do.
Well, he hit them. He was like afraid of my. He had no concept of them. I guess it's because like my roommate is male, and like, they would. But this rabbit was messed up.
Messed up rabbits would like your boobs.
But I mean, they can get messed up so easily though, because they're like really sensitive.
What kind of rabbits don't like boobies?
A lot of rabbits are really scratchy.
He was the Cornish Rex. He didn't like the instability, I guess, but so scared when I like was holding him. And I was trying to but they're so in tune with they're so looking out for predators all the time that they can't interact sometimes. Like they're kind of dumb.
Yeah.
They're kind of stupid, dude. I mean, I would eat one, but you can't eat them all the time.
So what's this in the notes about the rabbit pregnancy test? Can we talk about that?
Oh, well, first you have also in your notes that you can't eat them all the time.
Yeah, you can't eat them all the time.
No. So they're a game animal, and people like, okay, if you're a pioneer, yeah, I'd fucking eat a rabbit, but if you could get an ox or a cow or a chicken, you'd probably eat that first. But my roommate explained this to me is that if you eat too much rabbit, like if you eat rabbit exclusively, if you just raise them and eat them, you'll get a protein. It's almost like you get poison from eating too much protein because they don't have fat on their muscle.
Because they're so lean because how much they run.
Exactly.
If you have rabbits that are like in a cage, it's not as much of an issue because they're just sitting around all day.
They get fat, yeah. They get nice and fat, but when you cook them, the fat renders into the meat, and you don't have that deficiency issue. But if you're out in the wild, say if it's shit hit the fan situation,
you couldn't live off.
You'd be shooting rabbits and squirrels to eat, but if you eat just that exclusively, you're getting fast twitch muscle, which is a dark meat. It's a dark muscle. It's the part of the muscle that burns the fat. So you don't get any fat reserves. You don't get any of that good stuff that you get from like chickens or geese or ducks. Ducks have a lot of fat. Obviously pigs, cows.
Ducks.
So you're not getting that fat injection with the protein. So it kind of like solidifies in your body, and you get almost like a poisoning reaction to it because you get like blocked up with too much protein. So you can't eat it all the time, but it is a game animal, and you can eat it for survival, but you shouldn't just eat rabbits. Like try to eat other shit.
That makes sense.
And a lot of it's because how much humans need fat in order to survive.
Right. And the rabbits just burn it. So if a wild rabbit would be skinny as heck, like that's why hares are so good at surviving, because they're bigger and they're skinnier and they burn fat better.
So with the pregnancy test? You gotta tell me.
Okay. This is so cool. I found this out today when I was researching. Weird. This is so neat. Okay. So like, let me look this up. I feel like it was when did this happen? This was developed in 1931. This is the original pregnancy test. So, okay, girls that are listening. I'm sure no girls are listening, maybe a few. But guys, also girls, when you have to like do the morning after bullshit that you all know about, and you go get the pregnancy test and then she has to piss on it, and you get the little line and you're like, oh, I'm pregnant. Or you don't. Rabbits are actually where this exact test was based.
No way.
And I was like really like freaked out about this. This is so cool because rabbits are also a symbol of fertility. So this is really interesting that people used rabbits as a test for pregnancy.
But how?
This was like the 1930s when this was developed, and they used to do it in rats and mice. What they would do is take the blood serum of a female that wanted to know she was pregnant. Like, what if they had a mishap or she got, there was a tryst. There was a tryst. Okay.
Right.
So she goes to the doctor. They take her blood serum and then they inject it into an animal. So originally this was a mouse or a rat, but later they started using rabbits. So they would inject your blood serum into the animal, the small animal, And the presence of the HCG hormone, human chorionic gonadotropin, HGC hormone, which is produced while you're pregnant. So if you inject your blood or your plasma into an animal, their ovaries would enlarge.
Whoa.
If you were pregnant, because it would affect their endocrine system. And originally mice were used, but now rabbits were used in the 30s for this. What would happen is they would inject the blood serum of the woman into the rabbit. And then a few days later, they would do a vivisection. So they would kill the animal and dissect it.
A vivisection is when you do it alive. A dissection is when you do it dead.
Who knows what they did, dude?
A vivisection is alive without anesthesia.
I know, but I don't know if these people would have cared about that.
This is making me sad.
Because this is in the fucking like 30s, okay? And until the 40s, it was like, kind of considered not a good idea.
Yeah, people weren't even people back then, so whatever.
I feel like this went on for a long time. This went on at least until we had the pregnancy tests, the modern ones where you just piss on the strip and it works. But
I was honestly hoping you weren't going to say that they pee on the rabbit, but I think that'd actually be better than injecting them with blood.
I feel like it really would be. So they inject them, they dissect them, and then they look at the ovaries of the rabbit. So if the rabbit had enlarged ovaries, it meant that the woman was pregnant. And the error rate was less than 2%. So they continued to use this for a long time.
That's incredibly effective.
The term rabbit test was used in 1949, so into the 50s, as a term to say that you would be taking a pregnancy test. And then if you were pregnant, you would tell people that the rabbit died. We used toads for a while. I don't know, but we didn't have to kill them, actually.
That's when we figured out not to lick them. They're like, oh, this worked for the pregnancy test and for tripping out. Look, I licked a toad. Oh. Just listening to David Bowie. Just listening to China Girl on loop. Oh, yes. I am in toad heaven.
What now is there else to do besides eat carrots and shoot lasers?